Happy Cinco de Mayo, everybody. This is a very exciting session for our Builders Breakfast series. I scheduled it earlier in the year thinking that by now IDEM's new Rule 5 and SWPP program will have been rolled out. I was with IDEM last July where there was a promise, a threat, that the new program would be in effect around January 1st, but that hasn't happened. So what we're going to do instead is talk about the programs as they exist today, and we'll give a sneak peek at what's going to happen in the future. So with us today, we have Plantz from the city of South Bend and Hana Parkhill from the county. And before we get any further, maybe just introduce yourselves, what you do for the city and the county, and a little bit about yourself.
Hi, I'm Hana Parkhill. I've been with the county not quite a year and a half yet, but basically like my primary tasks involve working closely with the county engineer, our new county engineer, Sky Metters, and the county highway engineer, Chip Porter. And I do a whole range of things. I think primarily a lot of private, commercial, some industrial construction development reviews. I make sure they're in compliance with like our local county ordinance and our like storm and design standards and whatnot. I also assist with a lot of the Rule 5 reviews, which ties into this what is this called? It ties in with this seminar, this series, right? Yep. And so I review a lot of our construction, a lot of the construction sites, the Rule 5 erosion and control plans. I'm heavily involved with that review process, and I work closely with our inspector who goes out and inspects a lot of our Rule 5 sites. And then I assist the highway engineer with things like, basically cost estimates for a lot of like our pavement treatment programs, stuff like that. So that's just sort of a quick, lots of major subdivision reviews, plats, primary plats, secondary plats, that type of stuff. And I help oversee like calculations for, bonds and stuff like that, engineering bonds. So that's basically in a nutshell.
Thanks, Hana.
Yep.
Becca.
All right, so I'm Plantz. I've been with the city for a little over 2.5 years, and I'm a project engineer. So at this point, I'm just absorbing as much as possible. Definitely touch all corners. So in addition to being the MS4 coordinator, recently at the turn of the year, picked it up actually in a transition from Hana. So learning lots from Hana too. I work pretty specifically within our drinking water facilities and trying to absorb as much as I can from there, picking up venues, parks and arts projects, and we spent a lot of time in the Century Center and getting ready to start working on the Morris 100-year anniversary. And really any drainage service request, sewer projects coming through at that point. So that kind of sums up. I'm sure I touched way more than that.
Thanks, Becca, and thanks for both of you coming in person here early in the morning. And of course, the other featured guest is all of you on the call today, because erosion control is really a team sport. It's the design professionals who prepare the plans and the calculations. It's the city and the county who reviews those and inspects. And it's you who installs everything and maintains throughout the course of the project. So we're all in this together. So the agenda that we've laid out, I've got up on the screen. We're going to talk about some of the jargon. We're going to talk about the current requirements that the state has for both during construction and post-construction. We're going to ask Becca to run through how we make applications in the city. Hana will talk about the county, and you'll see that the process is very similar. And then we're going to just talk about some of the compliance issues, the things that, I think we can all work together to do better. So the talk. So what is Rule 5? And Hana, I think I was going to ask you to, is that your slide, Hana?
Oh, I think it's.
Oh, Beck.
Yeah. So Rule 5 it's required for stormwater discharges from construction activities of 1 or more acres. And the purpose of it is to protect public health, existing water uses, and the lovely common saying of US waterways, right? So anything that's going to be running off into that, and common misconception is rain, but especially where we're at and how our winter treated us, storm water also is considered from snow melt. So that's something for us to definitely keep in mind. I know that sometimes it snows and we say, we'll fix it whenever the ground thaws out. We'll fix that fence when the ground thaws out. Well, we really should try and fix things ahead because snow melt also is considered part of that. And so construction activities can be clearing, grading, excavation, anything that really is a land disturbing activity there of 1 acre or more.
So the threshold is 1 acre, right?
Mhm.
But we were talking beforehand, there is an exception for individual homeowners, right, that are working on their own home. An exception that doesn't necessarily apply to builders. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, so especially when you think of it as like a big puzzle piece, right? So if you're working on just one piece of it and nothing else in the puzzle is being disturbed, then if that one piece is less than 5 acres and it's a single family residential home, then that is not part of, a larger development, and it doesn't need an NOI and a permit. And then things where you would start seeing your puzzle pieces fit together and you need to have a NOI would be if I'm in a subdivision and there's a couple of lots that I'm working on. It's part of a bigger development, or maybe you're working within a strip, right, or a strip mall. Things like that need to be considered, even if the one site that you're looking at is less than 1 acre.
And the lots don't have to be contiguous, like they don't have to be attached to one another, as long as the total amount of acreage for the combined lots is greater than 1 acre, then that's when that Rule 5 gets triggered, basically.
And if anybody has questions on that, raise your hand or unmute
Yeah.
yourself.
It's very
We'll pause
confusing.
here. If not, we'll take questions at the end. Okay, I'm seeing nothing right now, so I'm gonna go
Nailed
ahead.
it.
And I do know the county engineer wanted me to relay that we want to emphasize that whoever the individual building lot developer, they're responsible for that lot and maintaining it and making sure their best management practices for erosion control are implemented at their individual lot that they're building.
All right, so let's stop right there a minute, because on the call we have David Eckridge, right? So very often, as somebody who controls an entire subdivision, the NOI is in his name.
Right.
But if he sells a lot to a Century Homes or a Place Builders or Devon Homes or Capstone, are you telling me that those responsibilities get transferred to those individual builders?
That's how we've been enforcing it. But this is the reason is we have a lot of these subdivisions that have been getting developed for many years, and the Rule 5 plans, they expire after 5 years.
Mhm.
So a lot of times the person who's on the NOI application, the permittee, they're no longer responsible for that development. So the onus is absolutely on the home, the actual building lot developer in that case, right? But if there is an active Rule 5 permit, ultimately, I believe the permittee is responsible for it. He should be coordinating with the different, contractors and whatnot.
Okay, does everybody get that on the call?
It's very complicated. Yeah.
So if you're doing the work, you're the one responsible for protecting the receiving waterways and storm drains,
Right.
that sort of thing. Okay, good. And then the other slide I have here, it's not really a permit that you get, right? Back up.
Yeah, so it's a general permit, so it's not issued the same as the NPDES permits you see from the EPA. It's a conditionally issued permit, so that comes through, depending on where you're at, it can come through the government or it can come through the state. And with all of us being local, and especially with you either developing within the city of South Bend or in the county of St. Joseph, you are developing where an MS4 already has a stormwater plan drafted and progressed as we were required to do so. So you then have to go check in with our code and follow our step-by-step to gain access to that general permit. So that's kind of why there's the step of working with your MS4 coordinator and then also sending it to IDEM, we're that first branch. You're making sure that you're meeting all of our requirements according to the stormwater plan that we had to do for IDEM.
So what is an NOI? And I think we've kind of covered that already. It's really a notice that the responsible party writes that you intend to comply with all of the requirements of the federal program that the state has been given the authority to manage. So that is an NOI. And what is Rule 13? That's Hana, right?
No.
No,
That's me.
That's you again, okay.
So I had mentioned that we had to have a stormwater quality plan set up, right, in accordance with Rule 13. That was the requirement of an MS4 area on its own, and that's Rule 5 branches out of Rule 13. So this is applied to, and we keep saying MS4, I'll go ahead and say the magic words, and hopefully I don't trip over myself with all of the S's, but it's the municipal separate storm sewer systems. And yes, I definitely looked at the paper because I never get that right the first time. But the first phase of all of this came through the Clean Water Act, and actually didn't move into including MS4 and construction activities until 1999. The first phase was more industrial. So the state adoption deadline was actually December 8th, 2002. And it became effective in Indiana on August 6th, 2003. So from that, if any, like I mentioned earlier, if any proposed project lies in an MS4, and the MS4 has an approved construction site runoff program, which both of us do, and you can see that within our municipal codes. City of South Bend's is Article 12, and that's where you meet Rule 5 and how we meet our Rule 13.
Thank you.
Okay, so next slide has to do with me basically describing what an actual MS4 is. And Rebecca, it's an acronym. It stands for Municipal Storm Sewer System. It took me years to get that down, and I still forget sometimes. But basically, just an overview of what it is. It's basically a conveyance or a system of conveyances that distribute stormwater, and the stormwater ultimately ends up in waters of the state, typically. And MS4s, they're owned by public entities such as municipalities like cities, counties, as well as public colleges. Those are MS4s. And something that's important to note and why this is regulated is that the stormwater discharged into waters of the state, it's oftentimes not treated. So that's the whole intent of the MS4 program. We need to protect our waters of the state. And also another thing to point out, not to confuse, make sure you don't confuse MS4s with combined sewers. That's a whole separate thing. MS4 conveyances do not, they never end up, the stormwater does not end up at the treatment plants. And then Becker actually went through the timeline, and I don't really need to go through the details, I don't think, but it's all here if you guys want to look back at it. But yeah, as she said, 1970s EPA established the Clean Water Act, and then eventually the Clean Water Act, like eventually the MS4 program evolved from this in the 90s. So the next page is NPDES. Yeah, this hones in on the actual the NPDES. It's the National Priority Discharge Elimination System program. This slide kind of hones into more of the details of how all that was implemented by the EPA. But basically, under the 1990 Phase 1 regulation, that's the first bullet point. Basically, entities were required to obtain NPDES permit coverage, and this is for cities or counties that have populations greater than 100,000. And I believe there's only one in the state of Indiana, which is Indianapolis. And then all the other entities pretty much fall under the Phase 2, City of South Bend, the county. And this is basically, it's called regulated small MS4 urbanized areas. And basically it's populations greater than 7,000. They're on a 5-year permit cycle. And a lot of times MS4s under the Phase 2 permit, they're partnered with like public colleges or, universities. I think that's meant to like help fulfill the public education outreach component of the program, because you can work with, the colleges and take credit for the programs that, they have, in regards to like environmental stuff that has to do with stormwater.
So there are 6 MCMs
Right.
in the EPA rule. Who wants to run through what they are? And on this call, there's really only 3 that would apply to the developers, right?
Right.
And I've tried to highlight them here on this slide.
Right. So there are 6 MCMs. My name's on the slide, so I'll go ahead and kind of tap in on this. And it's been a while since I've explained any of this, but there are 6 components to the MS4 program. And the one that you guys probably have little interest in, zero involvement with, there's the public education outreach component of the program. There's public participation and involvement, that's MCMs 1 and 2. Those are essentially the same, but it's just the component of the program where the MS4s are responsible for, reaching out to communities and making them aware of the MS4 program and just stormwater best management practices in general. And then there's also the MCM3, which has to do with illicit discharges. And that's basically, that has a lot to do with the MS4s having a way of overseeing all of the conveyances and monitoring all the discharge points and making sure that things like, for example, outfalls are in good working order and that there's some sort of program where where the entities, the MS4 entities are monitoring them regularly and making sure like, illicit discharges aren't getting discharged into waters of the state. So like, for example, you might have a program where someone's monitoring them. And if they observe during a dry weather event, some sort of, some gray discharge coming out of an outlet, you would obviously address that immediately. And this obviously doesn't apply to the contractors as much. So I'm not going to go into all the details.
Right.
There's more to that. You could talk about that for hours, to be honest. But I think the part that does apply to you guys is the MCM4, the MCM5, which is the construction site runoff control and the post-construction runoff control, which is having to do a lot with stormwater quality. So like during the construction phase of developments, the whole part of the MCM4 is to make sure that best management practices for erosion and sediment control are implemented at all construction sites greater than an acre. So that's kind of where we step in with, the oversight and reviewing of the Rule 5 plans, which we're going to touch on later. So that's probably the component of this program that you guys are most interested in. There's also the post-construction runoff control component, which is long-term maintenance of all the storm infrastructure at the site, or it could be something as simple as like a street sweeping program, anything that ensures that whoever owns a development, that they're properly maintaining all of the, the stormwater infrastructure and all the stormwater quality controls at their site.
So for the home builders on this call, that's mostly their detention basins that provide, and there needs to be a maintenance plan for that. In some cases, the developers are turning that over to the county, but in most cases, I think they're privately maintained.
Right, and that's through the urban or through the drainage board, and that's a very, we're very clear during the process. We specify like in these erosion control plans, like, hey, once the subdivision has been dedicated, that the drainage board will go ahead and maintain it long term. So there's a whole process that's
Right.
pretty detailed and called out. Yeah.
Good.
I would jump in quickly. We covered the 4, 5, and 6, or not 6, excuse me, 4 and 5 are applicable MCMs to everyone on the call, but I would consider also any of the public education and outreach and public participation and involvement. It doesn't seem like at the front face that that's something that they would get involved on, that you guys would get involved on, but did a booth at Notre Dame last year for green stormwater infrastructure, and just like worked out in the end that we got to put it within this, really lined up well for us. But I couldn't tell you how many, and this was a kids fair, I couldn't tell you how many adults came up to me and asked me about rain gardens and how they can add those to their homes and put those kind of sustainability implementation in their homes and in their subdivisions. So I think it is good to still link yourself into some of this education and outreach, understanding that our community wants to become more sustainable. Also with the city, we are working through council. If you're a big fan of the city and you attend all of our meetings, then if you went to the council meeting or have heard from it, we are working through some rate increases, and some of the stormwater is going to be based off of impervious cover. So, and residentials will still have their flat fees, but it's just something to think way far ahead for us. And on the aspect of sustainability, if you can be part of that public education and outreach and get folks to, work on integrating more than just a basin, or just add a catch basin. I've got a puddle, let's add a catch basin. Things like that is great for you.
So the point you're making too on the rain gardens, there's a market and people put a value on buying into a community that sort of embraces that approach.
Yes.
So that's great tips for all of us. So thanks for that.
Yeah.
And then what is a SWPP? SWPP, PPP. It's a stormwater pollution prevention plan that design professionals like me and like Bern on the call, we prepare as part of our overall set of construction plans. There's a checklist that the state puts out, and I've actually borrowed it from Hana. We put these on the plans to indicate how we comply with all of the requirements of the general permit, and either cross-reference details or provide a narrative on the plans. And I think it's best, I'm going to ask both Becca and Hana, it's better that all that information be on the drawing set and not some standalone document. Is that fair to say, or do you prefer one or the other?
I'm honestly open to either way.
Okay.
It depends on the project, because, that plan that I submitted for just a clearing, there is an actual construction set for that. It was basically a clearing of a large land that we were going to use to store debris on. So I just submitted it in the form of an actual report, like a standalone SWPP. But then, if you have an actual construction set, then it is better, I think, in my opinion, to keep it in there, and that way, like, whoever the owner is of that property, they have a copy of the SWPP, forever, basically. Like,
Yeah.
who's going to keep a copy of the?
And I am going down the image that you can see on the slide there, like a checklist. I mean, those are the items I'm looking for. So if you have them all on your construction plans and I have to go play Where's Waldo with them, it's going to take me a little bit longer to get it done. But if you have a corresponding document that says like A1, A2, A3, it will take me maybe an hour or less.
Exactly.
So anything that you can put together like that helps me turn it around a lot faster for you.
Yeah, I totally agree with Becca. As far as like the review process goes, if you follow the checklist, it's so much easier to review a plan. It literally is like Where's Waldo. If someone submits something, you have to literally go through all the details trying to find the verbiage that you're looking for.
So I know all of you guys, the first thing we do on a construction site is the clearing, the setting of the erosion control. So the easier we can make it for Hana and Becca to turn around their review of our application, it's better for all of us. So great point there.
Right.
So what is a post-construction SWPP? So I've actually cut and paste the guidance that IDEM provides here. And I have to say in St. Joseph County and South Bend, they're pretty reasonable when it comes time for that. Many of us, that are in the business of building homes for others, we don't control how a homeowner is going to operate their home. On the commercial side, I don't always know the operational, characteristics of a commercial site, but we provide some general guidance that essentially gets passed on to the user. So it is important that we provide a plan that can be followed, it's reasonable. And that is an obligation we have under the general permit too, to talk about post-construction. Any other thoughts you have on post-construction reviews or problems on our?
Well, so like if you look at the slide, that C5 is literally taken out of that checklist we were talking about. So it's item C5 from that SWPP checklist. And one thing we absolutely look for in the county is every time every single plan needs to have like a long-term maintenance program. So you need to plan out the frequency that certain like the storm infrastructure at the site will be maintained and monitored. That needs to be laid out in the plan, and then it's going to be in your stormwater pollution prevention plan report, but we also require it to be on the final construction plan sets because it's really important that whoever the current owner of the site is, that they know they're responsible ultimately for maintaining it. And that's basically what I wanted to touch on with this. We look for that every time.
And more and more, we're incorporating manufactured treatment devices
Right.
into our plans.
Right.
And the manufacturers do have recommended O&M manuals,
Right.
and you're okay with cross-referencing those?
Definitely.
Okay.
Yep. You would attach that to the SWPP report, or in a lot of times into the actual construction plan sets, which is where we see that a lot. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So what is an NOT? Who's supposed to cover that?
Oh, I am.
Okay. Is that me or you?
Yeah.
I think that's me.
Okay.
So the notice of termination is actually an obligation under the Rule 5 as well. So we're supposed to notify the reviewing agency that we're done, right? And often that ball gets dropped. We had a call preparing for this, and what's the percentage you think? It's over 90% of the time that step is missed. You really should try to make sure you meet that because it's all about the liability too. Although at some point in time, and we mentioned this earlier, there's only a 5-year life to the authorization that you have. So there is kind of a sunset provision that happens if you don't file that. So, but that's an NOT. So I wanted to take a little time again to highlight some of the statewide requirements. The process is 7 steps right now. So a design professional like us, we're going to prepare the SWPP. We're going to submit it to the review authority, which is Hana or Dept. And then the review authority under the state law has 28 days from the date of submittal, ideally to tell us that you're good to go. But often there's a couple of iterations back and forth. And I can tell you that both Hana and Dept really try to make even the back and forth work within the 28 days. All of the home builders on the call and the developers, they want to make that 28 days 3 days. But that's what the obligation is on the part of the state. The submittal includes the NOI form that is signed by the responsible party, by the design professional, and also includes a notice in the paper and proof that it's been published in a local paper. And then once the NOI is put in the mailbox, I know we go to the mailbox or sent electronically these days, within 48 hours later, work can start. So there is no second review that's done by the state. They're just kind of a record keeping office down there, and the obligation is on the developer then to comply. So you can start without waiting for anything back from the state. And this is where all of you come in. You're responsible not only to install silt fence and tracking pads on day 1, but to maintain those facilities throughout the life of the project. Now you can go some days where you're gonna have a dry spell and maybe dust control is the focus. But if you know there's rain in the forecast, it's a good idea, it's a great idea. These folks are gonna make sure you do it, that you inspect your silt fence, make sure they're towed in, and anything else that's there, because it's gonna take a beating, especially at this time of year when we can have thunderstorms and some heavy downpours. And then the last step again is the notice of termination. I've included, so we're going to talk about making applications to the county, and this actually is a functioning hyperlink. So on the county's website, you can find all the current forms here, and the information is pretty simple. You want to just run through it, Hana?
Yeah, so I don't actually go through this whole process myself. I do get calls about it from time to time, but I do think our website is pretty self-forward and it explains the process and whatnot. But what I tell folks when they call in and ask about what to do, I refer them to this link here, and I let them know there are some components I look for before I start reviewing the actual plan. And I want to make sure the NOI, it's like a submittal package, right? So I want to make sure an NOI is in there, the $150 payment is made. Obviously, the erosion control plan, which is the SWPP, is included. And basically, those are the three major items. But I do know that we also launched sort of like a portal in the last couple of months. So the $150 fee, traditionally people were submitting a check and I would wait for, the actual physical check.
And
before I
through the
could start.
pandemic, that was hard.
Yeah.
Because you couldn't show up in the.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah, so now we have a portal and all this you can just do electronically now, but I guess there is a $1.50 a transaction fee if you use a credit card. So yeah, that's pretty much it. It's pretty straightforward. And that's what I do to initiate a review.
Excellent.
That's what I look for.
And then in South Bend, process is similar, Becca?
Process is very similar. So if I were to go, somebody calls me and I start to direct them through how to do it, I'm like, pull up Google, type in City of South Bend, permit application, or you can go to the engineering main page and you'll scroll through. There is something I'm going to change soon because right now it's labeled as stormwater discharge permit.
Right.
And that's a little misleading because I don't permit stormwater discharge. So, but it's going to, when you click on that link, it's going to open up the erosion and sediment control plan. So that's going to be switched out soon. It'll say erosion and sediment control plan, but go through, fill out the information. Same thing, looking for, it does say hard copies. Obviously being a little on the younger side, I'm very okay with digital. I'm okay with getting those open and seeing that and getting it through. And then currently our office is still in and out. So for permits, our permit manager, you can catch her on the phone or she does come in on Thursdays. So if you're coming in to get that check filed, she'll be there on Thursdays.
Right, who's the permit manager?
Liz Horvath,
Liz Horvath, and on
Yep.
what floor?
13.
13th floor.
Yep, take her right off the elevator.
And so may I recommend when you change the name of the permit form, take away the obligation for the hard copies if you're cool with the
Yeah,
electronic submission?
absolutely.
And then I also noted, it says in there submitted to, and there's a personal name and address, so you may want to take that
Yes,
off.
that needs to be switched too.
Yep. So some housekeeping that Becca's
Yes.
going to take care of.
Catch
Right
her up
after
to
she
it.
leaves here, she's going to go.
Oh,
back.
right.
Yeah.
And I would say, on the permit itself, I'll go ahead and throw myself under the bus and try and be better about it. I do try and get these turned around within 10 business days, and that's what our permit says.
Yeah.
If
We
you,
are recording, you know.
yes, I know. That's what I'm saying. I throw myself under the bus. But we all know how it is. If you don't hear from me within those 10 days, just give me a nudge and I'll get to it, especially if you have the cleanest, prettiest SWPP. It's very easy to get through at that point. So
Good. And then in South Bend, there's two fees. There's a filing fee and then a permit review fee. So that's a little more expensive in South Bend than in the county.
yeah.
And the permit review fee is based upon the acreage.
Yes.
So if somebody has 1.3 acres, what's the fee?
Round it up.
Yep.
Round up. So you go to 2, it's not 1.3 times $100, $130. You're looking for $200.
Yes.
Okay, good,
Yep. Great point.
And then it caps at $1,000, right?
Right.
Right.
right. And then I stole this from Hana. So Hana put this flow chart together for the Rule 5 permit review process. I know, Becca, you're looking at it. It looks very complicated, but is it really?
It's not.
It's not. Okay.
It's not.
Okay, so you're basically the point person,
Mhm.
and you're gonna contact either the design professional or the developer. Who do you prefer talking to? Do you have a
Usually it's
preference?
whoever put the SWPP together.
Okay,
And that obviously changes between each project. But if I'm contacting somebody, it's because I have something I want to change within the SWPP or something I see in the construction plans that seems a little funky. I do sit in on our development meetings too, so I try and make my boundaries there for development so I don't get sucked into that portion of it, knowing that you heard all the duties in the beginning there, right? So, but I do kind of help out there, and anyone on our development team and myself, especially, looking at this flow chart, it looks overwhelming or maybe it looks like a lot of steps. Try to be as transparent as possible. If you just call me and ask some questions, I'm going to do my best to work through it with you. And if I don't know, then maybe I reach out to Hana, or we've got the Soil and Water Conservation District. And actually, a good point there is
yeah,
that
we should talk about that.
we don't review, Hana and I do not review each other's permits.
Yeah.
We don't have that biased opinion. anything that we do on a municipal base does go through the Soil and Water Conservation District. So if you drive by any of our sites, you see something weird, don't call the other one. It's going to be the Soil.
So these are projects that are undertaken by the city or by the county. You can't self-review your own plans. Good. All right. So common issues, making sure that, just because Hana or Becker say you're good to go, you need to file the NOI with IDEM. And you're looking for a call or an email at least 48 hours before the work starts, right?
Yeah.
And are the two of you the inspectors, or do you have others that do that for you?
So the way it works with the county, the subdivisions, there's just no way, there's so much going on with those. We actually do have an inspector who's involved with like the whole construction phase of those major subdivisions. So he also does the erosion and sediment control inspections, and he does enforce fines, for, repeat offenders and whatnot. So we do have someone that does that. Because I work so closely with the private developments that I'm reviewing. So this, the site's greater than an acre, but they don't have lots of lots and whatnot. They're not subdivisions. I do inspect those periodically, but sometimes my inspector, if he drives by one of them, he'll help me out. So we just work together, basically. I rely on him a lot. And I know the county engineer works closely with him with the major subdivisions and all that.
Yeah, kind of in the same boat. I am the inspector on if there's going to be a violation report. I'm going to be the one that fills it out. But we do have our permit inspector, Matt Longfellow, and a lot of you probably met him before. He's going to cover a lot of the occupancy and excavation permits that you would already have going. But he helps me kind of keep an eye on things since he's driving around town. And especially in the summer months here where we have a lot of construction going, I will have some interns and they'll stop out and keep up with things for me too.
And as far as like my role goes, like for the private developments, I often reach out to the designer and I'll ask, hey, who's the point of contact at the site? Because a lot of times the permittee doesn't know that information.
Right.
So I do often coordinate with the designer and they'll give me, the information I need. And then the county does try to inspect all the sites monthly. So there's an ongoing thing going on there, I think the goal is to do something like 70% of them or something like that is what IDEM recommends, because, they know we don't always have the manpower to inspect things constantly, but we do try to at least monthly, for the active sites. If it's inactive, then obviously not as frequent.
So I've got up on the screen now about the violation. So there are penalties if you don't maintain your sites throughout the course of construction. I happen to have kind of the steps in South Bend. Maybe we'll start there first. Becca, if you want to comment on strike one, strike two, strike three, how that goes.
Yeah, so this is going to be the contractor form, the form I send out when I approve of a SWPP or a Rule 5 application. My form and your form look very similar. My form is going to have the notice of violation, which is pretty much copy and paste right here. On the slide to your first violation, you do have 10 working days. Let me know, send me a picture, or I'll stop through, see if that got fixed. Your second violation is a $250 penalty fee per violation, and that needs to be addressed within 5 business days. And then the third violation is going to be a $500 penalty fee with a work stop order.
And that's the one that hurts the most, stopping work, right?
Yes.
It's really the last resort, I'm sure, for you, right?
Yes.
But sometimes it's your only choice, right? If somebody's going to ignore you, that's only common sense, human nature, right?
Yeah, but when it gets down to it, I mean, it's not fun to go through any of these violations, but just think about, the reason as to why we're doing it. It's to protect public health, and it's to protect, you throw it back to being younger and playing in the curb and playing in the rainwater. Like, think about what could be in there if you're not doing what you're supposed to do.
And Hana, is the process similar to county?
Yeah, it's pretty similar. I think most of our enforcement, like the enforcement actions, they apply mostly to major subdivisions, because I've had a lot of I mean, for the most part, the contractors are very responsive for the smaller commercial sites. So if I go out there and, you have to keep in mind, we're gonna expect, non-conformance. People do their best to maintain things, but we know there's a lot going on out there. So, we basically, I reach out, I communicate to the contractor, and then they have typically 10 business days to address what I'm looking for. As long as they've attempted it and they're in constant communication with me, then, they're good to go. So I've had good luck with that so far since working with the county.
Okay, so you'll be okay with a good effort, best effort.
Yeah, I mean, and that's because they are doing a pretty decent effort. And a lot of it is a learning experience too.
Yeah.
Like a lot of these contractors might work for like a certain food chain, for example, and they have construction sites in different cities and whatnot. And I'm noticing it's a total learning experience for them. So I'll always think like, hey, the takeaway is hopefully they're applying it to their other sites, so that's pretty much how it's been working.
Hey, Brian.
I've listed from your slide, Hana, some of the common field deficiencies. So
Mhm.
these days, what are you seeing as kind of?
It's almost always like maintenance of like inlet protectors is a big one. People forget about those because it's not on the construction site, it's on the adjacent roads.
Right.
And
So it's the fabric that sits just under the grate, right?
right, or it could be the coconut matting. Those
Okay.
usually have a lot of wear and tear. I don't know why, but you think that's more visible, but it's easy to forget about that stuff.
Mhm.
I mean, if you have good best management practices at a construction site, dirt and sediment shouldn't even be going into the gutters. It's supposed to be like a last line of defense, but I do notice that they do need to be maintained due to like weather, weathering, weather conditions, or even like when we're de-icing the roads, things like that, they just get torn up over the seasons. So that's a big one. And then I would say obviously sometimes bank stabilization, we just want to make sure that you could see gullies and stuff after rain events sometimes, and we just want to make sure they're on
Right.
top of that. They should be like seeding them after periods of inactivity, stuff like that, or like following the plan and making sure they're putting in the mats when appropriate, stuff like that.
Let me ask about bank stabilization. Have
Mhm.
you seen any product that works better than others? There's lots of things on the market.
I wouldn't probably be a good judge of that because I'm not, I would say the seeding is the most common. I don't know. It seems like the most effective would be the
Get the
matting.
turf established as soon as possible.
Right,
is
right,
really
yeah.
the key, okay?
Right. And making sure you remove the siltation at the bottom so that it has good conditions, once it's finalized, making sure that the base is, the appropriate soils, for infiltration and all that.
And any common mistakes you see back around the city?
Well, even before you get to the field, we don't get told a lot when you start. So that would help a lot. And definitely inlet protection, that one always seems to be the weakest. And the city's got standard drawings. Most of you end up, pretty much copying and pasting those over into your construction plans. So making sure that your contractors are actually using those items and it's not just a pretty picture on the plans. That's definitely something I see is flipped. And as Hana and I said, we're trying to keep up with these. We want to inspect them. But I'm going to tell you what's going to bring me out there is if you've got a lot of dirt coming off of your site and somebody's calling me, one of my bosses, one of the permit inspectors, maybe a resident is calling me and saying there's a lot of dirt coming off of this site. I'm going to, even just driving through town, I'm going to put the brakes on and be like, why is this coming off of this site? So that's a big deal.
So that's a big deal too, especially for our audience who are home builders working in a subdivision that is maturing. Those first buyers in carry the burden of the dirt being tracked through their neighborhood and brought into the house. So you want to be good to them, right?
And Becca touched on something good. Make sure the contractor refers to the actual erosion control plan that has the specifications for the protectors. Because a lot of times we see contractors just get a piece of fabric and they insert it under the lid or no, they somehow tuck it in, but those are absolutely not effective. The dirt collects in it, but then a lot of times people lift the fabric out and the dirt goes right into the drain. So the whole point of that, we're getting good about telling contractors, look, I mean, it's in the costs, the plan, it shows right there, you're supposed to have these approved devices. So we work, I mean, that's a whole learning experience. We're always, helping them, figure out what works best with their inlets and stuff like that. But that's a big one.
We are coming down the home stretch. I know we got a little space. I just wanted to give you a peek at what's coming. So The federal government advised Indiana a year or two ago that this current program that we've all loved, embraced, and followed for all these years is in violation of the federal law. And they need to fix it, and they need to fix it fast. So IDEM published new rules, as they're required to do, last October, and they accepted comments from the public through January 29th on both the Rule 5 and Rule 13. Unfortunately, IDEM hasn't printed responses to those comments yet, and until they do, the new rules don't take effect. I was on a call with Commissioner Pickett and others back in December, and the concern we all had on behalf of home builders is that there are some things in the new rules that are different. What happens if you filed your NOI beforehand, right, and you're still having an ongoing project? And they were also requiring some new requirements within 50 feet of a state water. And that's something brand new that there's a lot of concern about what you can and cannot do in a buffer area. For example, we do common things like utility poles, driveways that have to cross a stream, but the rule they published didn't make it very clear whether you could do that or not. And I've got some of those here, and what they put in there, and it's consistent with the federal law, is that if it is infeasible to do so, you don't have to comply with those buffer requirements. Well, obviously, that can be judged many different ways, what's feasible and what's not infeasible. So they needed to come up with some guidance on that. And again, the state has not yet provided any written response. So until they do, things will stay as they are. Another big change here is the turnaround time for deficiencies. We talked about 10 days, and under the new rule, you're only going to have 7 days. Actually, 1 business day to get on it. If your construction activity is going to be left idle for 7 days or more. So a really quick turnaround time. And then Becca, who's worked in Michigan before under Eagle, there's a self-reporting and document keeping requirement in Michigan on project sites. That's coming to Indiana too. So Becca and Hana are going to be able to request of your general contractor their record of all the inspections and corrective actions they've taken and pictures they've taken. All of this is going to add cost to maintaining your erosion control plan, and it's coming. And unfortunately, the state had little wiggle room on those things. But again, I'm very anxious to see how they're going to respond to some of these concerns that were made. And I know, Becky, you mentioned, you've heard that a lot of municipalities and environmental groups have similarly bombarded the state with written comments. So stay tuned on that. Again, I was hoping by now we would have had clearer direction on that, but we don't. So that pretty much wraps up our presentation. I've got all of the contact information for Hana and Becca, who've been very gracious to join us in person today and share their knowledge. My information is on there too. If you have any questions of me as a design professional, I'm happy to answer them. So in the short amount of time we have left, does anybody have a question that they wanted to ask of Hana or Becca or me? And Bob, can you open everybody's mic? Or
Brian, I do.
okay, we got a hand. Who needs to talk, Bob?
If they want to talk, I think they can just talk
All right, go ahead and shout it out.
if they're not muted.
Okay, this is Craig. I have a question.
Thank you, Craig.
Yes,
Craig,
I received a fine
somebody in the room.
in the mail before I received the notification of violation. Is there a way to email these to us instead of sending them in the mail system?
You asked him to start over.
Yeah, we couldn't hear anything.
Yeah, you were muted there at the start, Craig. You want to answer your question, ask one more time?
Sure. I received a fine before I received the notification of violation. Is there a way for you to email those to us so we can properly react more quickly as opposed to waiting for the US mail system to come through?
What fine, like what entity fined you?
I assumed it was yours. It was $250.
Was it the county?
I'll have to check with which job it was and see where it was. It could have been the county.
It hasn't been the past
Yeah.
couple months with myself. If I were to send out, I have sent out a violation. I've done a first offense just this year in the past couple months, and I emailed it. So definitely switch, especially with the result of our year. We are, and I don't want to speak for Hana. The world is shifting into more of the digital concepts, right? It's become easier and more reliable, and we have better access to keeping things confidential that need to be. But I would say from a city standpoint, I probably won't mail these to you. I'm going to be emailing you and talking to you directly. And I don't want to just send you a paper and call it a day. I'm most likely going to call you too.
You can email me and see, I can talk to my inspector. He has been, sending out violations, but he is very careful about making sure that the person has at least 10 business days to address an item before he enforces anything. Because
Okay.
we're really big on that. We don't want to shock anyone.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else have a question? Seen anything, Bob?
Is Quinn talking? I feel like he's muted.
I think he's talking to somebody in the
Oh,
room.
oops.
All right, I think that pretty much wraps it. So again, let's thank Becca and Hana for joining us.
Thank you.
We've got, next month, we're gonna do this again. We're gonna turn our attention, this is kind of a transition from the county to the city. We had both representatives here. We have Liz Maradek from the Department of Community Investments at South Bend, and Jan Volk, the consultant from New Jersey, who did a residential feasibility report for neighborhoods in South Bend. They're going to present the results of their report. I know some of our home builder members were asked to provide some input to that, so we're going to hear from them. That's going to be virtual again, because one of our guests are joining us from New Jersey. So we'll do this virtually one more time, and hopefully after that, we'll be in person with breakfast served. So thanks again for all of your support. Have a great day.